And sometimes it helps, again, spiritual direction is a specific relationship in which we get some practice, you might say, bringing parts of ourselves into relationship with somebody who is, I like to say, closely associated with God rather than the representing God or something. Anyway, that can get a little bit weird, but who's really connected with God in our lives. And so I can kind of practice some of those pathways. But with other spiritual friends and in counseling and things like that, I can get some practice about how somebody who is like God, loving, tender, merciful, understanding, relates with different parts of my life, and that can help me to then practice those, bring those pathways into prayer.
So in some way, spiritual direction is like it gives us the actual sort of physical, relational experience of how we might or should be relating to God in prayer. It's a sort of, and if we can do it here a little bit, then maybe I'll risk trying it in the evenings or in the mornings.
Right.
It feels like what therapy is to me sometimes, trying to make sure I'm adequately imaging how I think God would sit with somebody. I had an experience the other day. It was really beautiful. I was working with a client, and they said something that sort of indicated to me that they thought they had slid back a little bit. And were kind of trying to beat themselves up for it in front of me, maybe, so that...
You saw it.
So I saw it. Yeah. And I just said, I want you to know I'm not disappointed in you. Like I don't feel any disappointment whatsoever. Like this has never been about you performing adequately or well enough. And just the movement, like, and for me to, those are moments where you feel like maybe I've helped somebody, not only in other human relationships, feel like they can take risks in being more themselves and not having to self-flagellate or things like this, but maybe they have a new image of the Father or are willing to take a risk in a new way with the Father, and I think that maybe the Father isn't disappointed with you either. So something like that, you practice here, so that in prayer you can maybe realize that if Father Boniface feels that way about me,
That's right.
if he looks at me with the eyes of love in those dark places, well, surely he's not more loving than God the Father.
Yeah, and it's often not, you were describing kind of the internal thing that happens, but often without making that connection explicitly, it just opens those places up, makes them a little bit more safe, and the association, and I would think especially with a Catholic therapist, and that's some of the context of the relationship, and those images start to heal and tie back together in prayer. Yeah, that's really beautiful.
I like that image of spiritual direction though too.
But it's interesting because what I'm thinking here is like people who don't have spiritual directors, or don't even know about this, or don't have counseling, is it's like where are they looking for where they're deriving these things from? And like why have they chosen those people? Right? I mean, I think that's interesting, right? It's because at some level, right, what we're describing here is that with your attachment theory or whatever we want to describe it as, right, is that we're trying to build patterns of relationships, right? And what it seems like is people, for whatever reason, have chosen people in their life to give that power to, right? And so it's interesting that if you don't explicitly have a spiritual director, you might be assigning that to people who aren't going to be super helpful in the process.
I think it's a really helpful place to use the word authority.
Right.
Because an authority authors your story.
That's great, yeah.
And just like you said, you give permission to someone to co-author, to help to author your story, for better or for worse. And there are natural, there are certain authority structures. Catholics look to priests and clergy as authorities, and again, for better and for worse. But those kinds of relationships, friendships, and obviously parental relationships, other fiduciary relationships, we're giving authority to a person to help write some of those storylines. And those are going to affect our relationship with God.
Right. And it's amazing how deeply we hold on to those when we're given them.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you can, we were talking about this some weeks ago about, we were laughing when we were coming up with other names for this podcast. and one of the podcasts had the name Road as part of it. And we just kept saying the word road over and over again until the word was like falling apart for us. Like it was like dissolving. And I'm like, the word doesn't even look like a real word. I'm like, is that how you spell it? Of course it's how you spell road. I've known how to spell road for like a really long time. Right? But you were talking about how when people, right, like, you know, someone, like their parent calls them something, a failure or something when they're a child, you have them say it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's a type of therapy that wants us to sort of pull back from the power that language has over us sometimes. So they'll have you say a word until the word sort of, you recognize the word as just sort of sounds. It's just a sound. Right? It's just road, or it's stupid. And that you say it enough and all of a sudden it just sort of loses its, you know.
What's that called?
So it comes out of the acceptance and commitment therapy literature. So it's some of the third wave behavioral therapies that, so, you know, cognitive therapy says change the content of your thoughts. So if you think you're stupid, what's the evidence for that? Change the actual belief to be more accurate. The third wave therapies say don't worry about changing the content of your thoughts, change your relationship to them. So rather than thinking that just because you have a thought, it must be true, it must be meaningful, it must have some significance, you learn to sort of take a
Distance.
distance from it and learn to watch those thoughts.
Yeah.
And I can grab onto any thought I want.
Yeah.
But just because I have it doesn't mean I have to let it put its hooks in me and drag me down the road of anxiety. And so they'll even say, instead of saying I'm anxious, you say I'm having an anxious thought. Like you are not anxiety itself.
Right.
You are having an anxious thought. It's a phenomenon happening within you, but you're bigger than it. Your foot doesn't feel anxious. There's parts of you that don't feel anxious. Right? So they try to play with language a little bit with this therapy as well. So,
but this concept of being able to step back from things is also, of course, it also plays into IFS.
Yes.
I appreciate it for that reason. Unblending, getting into self,
Yes.
but very helpful in the context of prayer too. That, you know, and it's sort of what we're, you know, it's describing as well. Paying attention to how I'm praying. Being able to have in the monastic literature, so obviously that's formative, foundational for me, so Evagrius, St. John Cassian, and then that, it flows especially into some of the Christian East, the Philokalia and some of those developments. But in the Greek, the word nepsis is watchfulness, and the, you know, some of the, I think it's actually in Cassian, he talks about that the to step back from, so to station yourself, to watch at the gate of your mind, and to be able to watch some of these things that are going through, to have a little watchful part, you might say, that's able to pay attention.